Welcome back, guys. Today we'll be doing modes of ventilation. So modes of ventilation, when you're having a patient on ventilator support, you can't just plug him into the machine, just turn it on. It doesn't work like that. You need to have a certain set of parameters which have to be set in with the patient being on the ventilator. So that is what a mode is. So when you look at the terms, the mode. So the mode is the set of parameters the operational set of parameters which are giving to the ventilator machine when the patient is put on ventilator. So we have three types of them basically. So we have controlled, assisted control, SIMV, and support ventilation. So we'll just look at a few of the terms before we actually get in. So what's a mode? Mode is the operational set of instructions, settings, parameters that you're putting in the ventilator before putting the patient in. What are the types? So you have three modes. Basically, we have three modes of ventilation which we actually give the patient, and then in each of them we have another three subtypes. Okay, so depending upon the variable which we are keeping constant, which are presetting, we have various types in those modes. Okay, so it becomes a 3x3 type of configuration. So we have three modes, under them we have three types, so it becomes totally 9 types of ventilation. And what's mandatory? So if you prefix the respiratory rate of the patient, that's a mandatory ventilation. The amount of air which the ventilator is pushing into the patient now becomes mandatory. And in case the patient on his own will is capable and is taking in a breath, that becomes spontaneous. So mandatory is the one which the machine is pushing in, and spontaneous is the one which the person himself is taking. So when you are setting a mode, you need to look at a few things. So you have to set in the inspiratory parameter. So when should the inspiration takes place? What's the expiration parameter? How do you go from inspiration to expiration? Are you maintaining a constant volume, or do you go from inspiration to expiration after pushing in a certain amount of tidal volume, or after the pressure drops to this much? So how does the inspiration cycle to expiration? Then you also have to set the respiratory rate. You also have to set the trigger. So does the patient trigger it, or does the machine automatically think by itself on how to start the inspiration? And you have to specify if you're allowing the machine to let the patient take in a spontaneous breath or not. Okay, so various modes. So we have CMV, controlled mode ventilation, in which we're controlling all the parameters. We're controlling the volume, we're controlling the pressure, we're controlling the respiratory rate, we're controlling the number of breaths. So controlled mode ventilation. Assisted control mode ventilation states that it will help the patient initiate a breath. So if he has difficulty breathing, it will help him initiate the breath by giving some amount of pressure or pushing in some amount of volume into his lungs. And if still he's not able to spontaneously breathe after initiation, it will just go back to CMV and push the required amount of air in, take it out, and continue how many cycles as required for the respiratory rate. Then we have IMV, intermittent mandatory ventilation, which means, okay, you have set a respiratory rate, okay, of let's say 10. You have a respiratory rate set of 10 for 60 seconds, which means for every 6 seconds, a new cycle has to be initiated. But in intermittent mandatory ventilation, between cycles, the machine is going to allow the patient to take in a spontaneous breath. Okay, so totally, if the patient takes 2 breaths spontaneously and you have 10 mandatory breaths because you have set the respiratory rate to 10, then totally you'll be having 12. Okay, 10 plus 2 spontaneous, so totally 12. Now synchronized IMV is a type of IMV which we commonly use, in which the total respiratory rate which you're setting include both mandatory and the spontaneous breaths. So depending upon the respiratory rate which you have set, you have what we have called as a mandatory setting. So if the patient doesn't take any spontaneous breath, it's going to do the entire, let's say 10, you have set the respiratory rate as 10. So it's going to do the entire 10 cycles. And if the patient is capable of breathing on his own and he has taken some spontaneous breaths, let's say he's taken 5 spontaneous breaths, then the machine is going to account for those 5 as well and only going to give 5 mandatory breaths. So in end, you have the amount of breaths which you have set, including both mandatory and spontaneous. So it avoids stacking up of ventilation. So how much you have set, that much is only going in. Then we have PSP, pressure support ventilation, in which there should be a spontaneous breathing. So in pressure support ventilation, the patient is capable of breathing on his own. He initiates it, he himself initiates it, and then the machine helps him continue and end the cycle by providing a certain amount of pressure. So that's PSV. PSV is only used in weaning. So you have a patient who has been on ventilator for a long duration of time and finally you have to take him off the ventilator, but you can't do it suddenly. You have to do it step by step. So that's PSV. You help it, you wean him off. So for all this time he has been under mandatory ventilation. So you get him to a spontaneous ventilation with supported, and then finally off the ventilator where he moves on with his spontaneous breathing. Then you have the types. So we have PCV, that's pressure controlled, VCV, and PRVC. So PCV, you are keeping pressure constant and volume can vary depending upon the patient compliance. Then VCV, you're controlling the volume, the amount of tidal volume which is going, and the patient pressure depends upon the airway which he is having. And PRVC, pressure regulated volume control. So it's a dual type where a set amount, you're setting the volume is the control, so the volume will not change. So the volume will be forced in, but the pressure of the ventilator will vary to maintain the most minimum PAP, possible airway pressure, throughout the cycle. So depending upon this is just compliance, is airway compliance, you're going to vary the pressure of the ventilator so that most minimum of possible airway pressure is maintained and you still deliver the amount of volume which you wanted to deliver. So in ACV, the mode ACV or CMV, we have again three types: PCV, VCV, and PRVC. And those are the names, and the indications mostly is acute respiratory failure and acute respiratory distress syndrome and acute respiratory failure with disynchrony of ventricles where they are contracting but not in sync. Then in SIMV again we have the three types and you have so 6 of them, and indications mostly we go for acute respiratory failure, but sometimes it's not used frequently, the PCV. And other topics would include PSV, so pressure support ventilation, I already talked about that. And then the positive respiratory pressure, so CPAP, PAP, PEEP, there's another video on that. If you want to, you can check that out. So basically that's the whole modes of ventilation in a nutshell. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.